Welcome to FACT's webinar called Managing Rotational Grazing for Pigs and Poultry. Our presenter today is Lee Reinhardt with NCAT and ATRA. This webinar is hosted by Food Animal Concerns Trust. I am Larissa McKenna, FACT's Humane Farming Program Director, and I will be moderating today's session. We're so glad that you could join us. So before we dive into the presentation itself, I do have a few quick introductions. Food Animal Concerns Trust, or FACT, we are a national nonprofit organization that's headquartered in Illinois. We promote the safe and humane production of meat, milk, and eggs. I direct FACT's humane farming program, which provides a variety of opportunities for livestock and poultry farmers, and this webinar is part of our humane farming webinar series. So please visit our website, which is listed here, to learn more about all of our other farmer services, including upcoming webinars in our ongoing scholarship program. So this time, I'm very pleased to introduce our expert presenter, Lee Reinhardt. Lee is an agriculture program specialist with NCAT and ATRA, serving the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic regions. He's the author of NCAT's 2018 publication called Multi-Species Grazing, a Primer on Diversity. We are very lucky to have him with us again today to share his experience and insight on this topic. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Lee so that he may begin his presentation. Lee, please take it away.
And it just said that I'm unmuted, so I hope everybody can hear me.
You are unmuted.
Awesome. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. I'm really happy that everyone can attend. And thanks, Larissa, for putting this together. I know we've got a lot of people all over the country. I like how Larissa kind of will welcome individuals as they come on and kind of mention where you're from. So I get an idea of like, wow, people from all over the country here. We're going to be talking about pigs and poultry. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today is applicable all over the country because we're going to talk about some high level type principles, and then they can be adapted as you get closer to your own regional area. I think one of the things that you're going to hear an awful lot today is adaptation. I think that's kind of the new word in regenerative agriculture, is just observation, adaptation, observation, monitoring, right? Because we're dealing with this complex biological system that we're a part of, and so we're going to be doing a lot of that today. So I'm in northeastern Pennsylvania, and that's the particular area that ecology that I kind of come from, and so that's the perspective at which I'm going to be offering a lot of this information. But again, it is applicable throughout the country. One thing I would like to say is that later on this year, ATRA is going to be publishing a new publication by Linda Coffey, one of our agriculture specialists in Fayetteville, on pastured pig production, and so it'll be a brand new technical publication out with lots of good resources and ideas and guidance to help people with pastured pig production, and that will complement the pastured poultry publications that we have. So with that, I'd like to get right into some of the content here, and talk a little bit about how we're going to run this today for the next hour. We're going to discuss the elements of both running pigs and poultry on the same pastures at the same time or sequentially, and we're going to give some insight on how to run them together on the same fields and maintain pasture and ecosystem productivity and resilience, which can be hard with these guys because they're different from ruminants, right? They behave differently on pasture. So with that in mind, we ask ourselves, what are some of the issues that come to mind broadly, generally, whenever we're talking about running pigs and poultry together? And some of the ones that come to my mind are, some positives and some not so positives, or things that we need to manage, right? Certainly, enterprise diversity is one of them. I mean, having pigs and poultry together even whenever you can integrate gardening or crops or other types of livestock, really increases the diversity of your enterprises. It increases financial resiliency and more income from various streams. Also, these animals are really great for smaller acreages. A lot of farmers can take advantage of using smaller livestock on smaller acreages to increase their, to have increase their enterprise diversity. Some of the other things that come to mind, though, are things like rooting and vegetation loss. This can happen with both of these species. Distribution of manure can be an issue as well, and then the different types of feedstuffs that we're putting out for these animals. These are just aspects of management, I think, that come to mind whenever I think about what are the issues, what are some of the main issues we need to look for. And so, throughout the next hour, as we discuss, we're going to kind of go into some of these things and get into some detail about some of these aspects. So the first thing I think that we need to realize is that running pigs and poultry together is not the same as running poultry or pigs with cattle or small ruminants. It's a different idea altogether. Following pigs is usually difficult. Following with pigs is usually difficult because it lengthens the rotation. Um, and cattle and sheep would have a lot less impact on the land, of course, than pigs would. So, if you're going to be, following any other livestock with pigs, a lot of people will follow cattle and sheep with pigs. Um, they will have a lot more impact on the land than those cows and sheep will. If you can run sheep or cows first, that's really kind of best because you can run those livestock through first before the pigs come, and you can kind of get that grass down. Right, you can get the grass down for them a little bit. That's really good for poultry because poultry need to have the grass just a little bit lower, and it facilitates better management whenever you've got pigs and poultry together. If you don't have any other livestock, you're only just doing pigs and poultry, you can run one before the other, depending upon your setup and the condition of the fields. Think though that you may have to do some mowing. If you don't have sheep or cattle that are going to be grazing that down, you may have to do some type of mowing after you run these livestock through in order to get the grass down and to restart it. Some producers find that works pretty well. The main thing is to keep the forage high enough to maintain good cover. Pigs. Another thing is there a lot of people ask, what about depredation? Because sometimes people will say that pigs actually depredate poultry, and poultry, can fall prey to pigs, and they can eat them, they can attack them, whatever. And that's been a concern from some people, but most farmers that I have talked to throughout the country, whenever I ask them that question, they say, "Well, I've never had a pig eat a chicken or kill a chicken at all." So I think the issue here is to to really have diverse pastures, high quality pastures, frequent moves, high plant nutrition, plenty of water, lower your stress. Those types of things will work for several different problems that we might encounter, including poisonous plants, depredation, anything like that, as well as disease and parasite resistance. So it basically just use those basic principles to take care of any of those problems that you might encounter. Another thing about running pigs and poultry versus cattle or small ruminants is that uh, you're usually going to have movable shades, water, feeders, things like that. That you're going to have to move along with them. Oftentimes, we don't have to do that with large ruminants, except perhaps water sometimes. But you'll have to think about how you're going to facilitate your infrastructure, your feeders and such that oftentimes are actually moved together with the animals. So this is, if you've never seen this publication, the Grassworks has a grazing guide that I think that I've been using quite a while in education on pastured pig production, and I like to use these characteristics because these will have an influence on the management that you're going to do. One feature is that pasturing pigs is going to lower your feed costs, but that's basically only if your pasture is well managed and diverse, because they will take some of their nutrition from the pasture. Um, you can also expect similar weight gain and similar feed efficiency compared to confined operations, as long as you're maintaining them on a good plan of nutrition and they've got good energy supplementation. And you can expect lower costs for capital improvements, but these can often be offset by labor costs. I mean, you're going to be putting more labor into this because in a confinement system, you've got environmental controls and movement and handling and things like this that really take care of an awful lot of your of a lot of your labor. But in pastured systems, it's a little bit more work intensive. So whereas your capital costs may go down a little bit, your labor costs might go up a little bit in a pastured situation. Another one is health problems. Like all animals, like grass-fed ruminants as well, pastured pigs that are on pasture generally have reduced animal health problems. That's because of their outside. It's a behavioral issue. Stress is reduced. They're getting sunshine. They're getting fresh air. They're getting fresh exchange of air. They're not subject to being in a house. They can accumulate ammonia that can cause respiratory illnesses. So um, it's really good for helping out with animal health problems, greater leg soundness because they're actually moving about, and but there can be more potential for parasite problems in pastured pig operations. So that's where we start looking at rotation, 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 and that's going to be another touchword for today. So if you top all these off with an increasing demand for organic and for humanely raised pastured pork, the possibility of being profitable with a pastured pig operation becomes a lot more tangible. It's something within reach. So with those basics kind of put out of the way, let's get into the weeds a little bit. We're going to talk about breeds here. We're going to move on and talk about stocking and space and fencing and moving pigs and pasture and things like that and incorporating poultry. But the first thing, it's like, what types of animals are we going to use? What's out there? Will the animals that I typically have in a confined situation work in a pastured situation? And my answer there is yes, if those animals come from a line of animals that have been adapted to pasture. We see this an awful lot with dairy cows. Sometimes some people will say that Holstein dairy cows are not good grazers, but there's an awful lot of Holsteins that do well on pasture because they've adapted over time to them and they've become really good grazers. Well, it's the same with these breeds. You'll want to select your animals from those that have been raised on pasture and have a high tolerance for stress and are adapted to outdoor life. And this typically means some of the more rare breeds, some of the breeds that we don't see a lot. These animals have traits that we're looking for, such as hardiness in extreme climates. We want them to be able to take care of themselves, take care of their young, forage and feed and find shelter, and they're taking on a lot of that responsibility since we've kicked them out of the barn. We're not bringing the feed to them anymore. They've got to be able to go out there and hustle and do it themselves. So we're looking for parasite resistance, foraging ability, good maternal characteristics in the pigs. That's something that we really need. Some of the pigs that we're looking for are some of the old breeds, some of the Berkshire, the Chester Whites, Durocs. Chester Whites, Durocs can often be used in confinement as well, but some of them can do pretty well on pasture. The Hampshires, the spotted pigs, Tamworths are really good grazers. Large blacks, Gloucester old spots. Those are some pigs that have been of the old world breeds that have been raised on pasture and have those natural characteristics that have not been selected out in favor of meat production. And some of the poultry breeds that you might think of are, the red ones, the Rhode Islands, the New Hampshires, the Wyandottes. These are good in the cold climates. Cornish crosses and Red Rangers. Those Cornish cross or the hybrid crosses, tend to produce a little bit more meat, but they've kept some of the traits, such as foring abilities, but the lines over time are starting to kind of weed out some of those traits that we really want for pasture. So we're going to look for breeds that are going to be doing really well on pasture. And so um, up here in the Northeast, we get our birds a lot from McMurray Hatchery, and they have a really good reputation with farmers. And you can tell them what you're doing, and they can make sure that you get the type of eggs that poultry you need for the pasture system that you're going to be doing. Oh, and another word is on aggression. Some people are concerned about aggressive pigs, and I think what I have seen with pigs is it's usually a breed characteristic. Most pigs are typically pretty. Uh, are pretty good and have mild dispositions. The Choctaw, which is an old world breed, is an excellent forager, but has been known to be a little aggressive at times. Again, I think this comes down to handling. It comes down to high plane of nutrition, allowing them to express themselves and to uh, and to be a pig, as they say. So let's talk about space requirements and stocking for a minute. Um, so we're going to talk about both pigs and poultry here with stocking, and some of the basics, that we have see in the literature and through practice can be applied here on pasture. The American Pasture Poultry Producers Association recommends that poultry have about 2 to 4 square feet per bird indoor. Right, whenever they are on pasture. So, given that they've been on pasture, having space where your layers can get in and have about 2 to 4 square feet per bird is a pretty good husbandry practice. And then having them outside, most producers would look at about, say, 50 to 100 birds per acre. And the reason for that is because if you get over about 100 hens per acre, as you know, as a stocking density, you're going to start to get that manure impact. You're going to get trampling. You're going to get high input of nitrogen. That many birds on a pasture for a long period of time can really load the pasture up. And then we've got problems with matting, with trampling. We've got lots of manure. We can have erosion and runoff, and that can be a problem. So trying to stay between 50 and 100 hens per acre is probably a ballpark. Some producers will have 5, 6, 700 birds, and what they'll do is they will have 3 to 5 acres, and they will rotate those around daily or twice daily, say with an eggmobile or something like that. So they're actually managing that impact with those animals. That stocking density may still be about 100 hens per acre, but they've got them kind of confined, much the way you'll do with adaptive grazing with ruminants, and just moving them fast. And again, it's all about observation and adaptation. How long can they stay on there before they start really impacting the ground? So let's talk about pigs for a little bit. Um, Pigs need a little bit more room. They act way different on pasture. Of course, they're not ruminants. They're not going to be relying on the pasture for all of their nutritional needs. But based on some observation and some historical data, we know that we can stock about 15 or so finishing pigs per acre, or about 4 sows per acre on annual forages, and about 15 to 30 finishing pigs, and about 6 sows per acre for perennial pastures. Right, perennial pastures are typically a little bit more resilient. They typically have deeper root zones, and hold the ground a little bit better. And so that's a pretty good starting point, I think. And you can develop your paddock system for smaller paddocks and move frequently and observe and move around. But I think these are some good starting points whenever you're thinking, okay, how many pigs can I have here? Find out your acreages, take a look at these numbers, and determine how you can make a paddock system to move around. And we've got some good resources that we'll talk about in a little bit on how you develop those paddock systems. So fencing is a big one, and um, The nice thing about poultry and pigs is that typically you can use the same type of fencing on both of them, and that's another reason why they really do work together within a rotational system. Whether you're running them together or you're running the pigs first and you're following with the chickens in order to go through and pick through manure and pick parasites and things like that. The fencing that you use can be used for both, and it depends on the type of fencing. Depends really on, do you want to keep the pigs out or predominantly keep predators out? What are you looking at here? Do you have a nice perimeter fence and then you're using poultry netting, hog netting, that type of thing to separate your internal pastures? That can work really well, and you've got a protective outer fence to keep the predators away from them. Poultry netting and hog netting can be purchased from Premier. It's a decent it's a decent online outlet where you can get lots of good poultry and pig stuff. I like to throw people their way because they've got a lot of good educational resources. These two fences that we have on the screen, on the left, you've got netting. This works really well. You can move these things on a daily or every 3 days or every 2 days, depending upon what the impact these birds are having on the pasture. Step in post, so a charger, and you're off, right? And it typically works to keep a lot of the predators out as well. Um, the one on the right is a farm that I was on up in New Hampshire. And I think this was in New Hampshire. And this pig producer is using just 3 strands of electric wire, about 3, 6, and 8 inches off the ground. And this works really well. He can run this through the woods. He makes alleys with it, and this works really well to keep his pigs within the confines of the space that he has for them. So what I have seen is that the type of fencing you use is very site specific. Most of them out there that I've seen has just been some type of farmer innovation. Look and see, use your own creativity. What are you trying to do? And move on from there. But there's a lot of good resources and a lot of good farmers out there who've got some good examples. So, if you're going to move pigs around, these guys certainly are not like sheep and cattle and such. They typically have their own mind. They're not as easy to move around. But if you can use pig boards and lures, those are some of the best ways to actually move. Now, if you have a pig board, they work great if you're within a confined space. Just a little board that you can kind of keep between you and the pig and move him along, get him up into the trailer. That works really well if you're in confined alleys, or if you're in a small pen or something like that. That can work really well. Otherwise, they will typically, if you open new pasture, they will typically move to new pasture an awful lot like cattle will, just because of the fact that they're interested, they're curious, it's novel. They've got a new place to go. So you can utilize that in that type of behavior as well. So Temple Grandin, most people know about Temple Grandin, and she has got some pretty good recommendations on livestock handling. And some of these that I put up here are just some of her ideas and her recommendations on handling pigs. Using solid sides on chutes, doing things that can reduce excitement and agitation. Keeping that field of vision down so that they're not scared by outside movements. Keeping noise down. Realizing that they're herd animals, and the isolation of a single individual will make that individual scared. That's an opportunity for an animal to become aggressive or become frightful and can hurt you or the animal. Using the animal's previous experience with handling, it will affect its reaction. So training them, approaching them with care and with a low stress environment. And feed rewards. Feed rewards generally facilitate training. I know a lot of farmers will just, put feed in a trailer, have an alley go into a trailer, put the feed in there, get them used to going in there to eat every now and then, and whenever they're all in for feeding time, one time close the door and you got your pigs. So there's a lot of good things, but I think the general idea here is to really observe and use the pig's behavior as a tool. So, pasture restoration. This is a big one because here we're going to be using the principles of duration of rest and, again, observation of animal impact as a measure of, when we move animals. Um, these, pigs and poultry will pick and will get some of their nutrition off of the pasture, but not being cattle, not being sheep or goats or deer or any other ruminant, they're going to they're going to impact that land way different than they are. Um, they're going to impact that land way different than cattle and sheep would. So we're going to approach pasture management with an idea of restoration, with an idea of how do we reduce impacts so that these pigs don't tear it up. So I think one of the things that we need to look at is maintaining adequate ground cover. And this is a challenge for a lot of pastured swine producers. If not managed well, pigs can turn a pasture into a moonscape, and that can have negative impacts, as we know, on soil and water quality. On the lower right of your screen there, you will see a screenshot of a webinar. It's called Conservation Planning Considerations for Outdoor Swine Operations. This was a couple of years ago, put out by NRCS. If you Google this, you'll pull it up, and it's something that has been archived on their website, and you can look at this. It's a great resource for offering tips on maintaining ground cover, and it provides good information on facilities and on stocking rates, and some pretty good concepts also on helping to develop a rotational grazing system. I highly recommend that as a tool to put in your toolbox. The authors of this webinar note that maintaining ground cover with live vegetation or with residue is really challenging, but it's possible with observation and good management. You need to pay attention to nutrient management because there's very little nutrient removal from pig pastures unless you have a crop afterwards. And we'll kind of go into that a little bit later about how do you take care of nutrient management on a pastured pig and poultry operation. Rotational stocking is possible, and it's a good way to provide some control over that vegetation survival and to minimize soil disturbance. And it's also recommended that crop rotations be implemented following pigs to provide nutrient management and to smooth that soil surface and to minimize disease buildup. So what we're going to do is we're going to build rotations based upon stocking density and based upon forage condition. Right. And this could be daily rotations for 20 or so growing pigs per acre, or it could be several days or less intensive grazing systems for poultry. Time on the paddock is not so much dependent on forage consumed as it is with ruminants, but it's dependent on the impact that the animals have on the pasture. So what I want to show you right now is my idea of an of kind of like the premier ideal uh, uh, pig and poultry pasture. This one is a picture that I took at the Rodale farm. They have an 8-acre pig farm that's with rotational grazing paddocks, and this is what it looks like in the spring and early summer. They've got a really good diverse crop of annual rye, field peas, brassicas. I think you might see some red clover in there, but there's an awful lot of diversity here. And this is the perfect type of pasture for pigs to run on. They can trample this down. They'll root. They'll eat some of the brassicas. They'll eat the peas and nibble around, and they'll break it down a little bit and allow the poultry to follow right behind and be able to pick through manure, pick through and get some of those seedlings and get some of those seeds and such. This is an excellent type of pasture I think that you try to look for an annual pasture. So we've discussed a little bit on pig pasture. What about poultry pasture? What are some of the characteristics there? It's going to be a little bit different, and it makes integrating them a little challenging. But I think if we take pigs first and follow them with poultry, it really helps to alleviate an awful lot of these problems. We know that chickens, turkeys, things like this, were domesticated from wild seed-eating fowl long ago, and they cannot digest much of the nutrients in the forage. They may digest as much as 5%, but they're really good at picking insects and getting seeds, picking through manure pack, doing stuff like that. So they're going to get a little bit of their nutrition from the pasture. And you guys know this whenever you look at the difference in the eggs, in the color of the egg yolks between your pastured eggs and the ones that you get store bought. Not very much of that nutrition is coming from the pasture, but it is enough to actually make a definite impact on the nutritive quality of that product. Poultry are really going to be looking at young vegetative forage. They need a diverse pasture with lots of grasses and legumes. They'll have oats in the winter. They can have alfalfa or clover in the spring and the summer. Really, those are really high in protein and a really good way to maintain pasture resiliency. They tend to trample the forage. That's if it's over about 4 inches in height, which can be a good thing or a bad thing depending upon your management. If they're on there too long, like uh, uh, eggmobiles that are in a field left too long. What is the underneath of that eggmobile look like? It's completely matted, and it's almost as if there's a layer of manure on the top of it. It might have been left there too long. You may have to go through there and drag that a little bit. Um, but they will, if the forage is too high, they'll typically trample it. And if they're not on there too long, that is an excellent way to get that forage down on the soil surface. That's good carbon feed source for soil microorganisms, and coupled with the manure, that's an excellent way to regenerate that pasture. You can rotate to crops or other pasture every year. This really helps to reduce parasite and nutrient loading, and a lot of producers suggest that put some type of crop in that rotation, because you're going to have to think about what are you going to do with that nutrient loading. You run in pigs and poultry through for a year on these pastures, you're likely going to load it up. And so how can you utilize those nutrients next year? Maybe you're going to plant cover crops and run cattle through. Maybe you're going to put in a grain crop. Maybe you're going to put it into vegetables. And we'll talk about ways to do that. Um, so the natural tendency is for chickens to kind of follow the poultry through these systems. They like to pick through the manure and such, and you can move these guys, daily, 2 times a day for meat birds, or in chicken tractors, daily to weekly moves for egg mobiles, depending upon that forage matting I was talking about. And think about like what we talked about before, structures and fencing. This will impact your moves in your rotation. So having some type of fencing system and infrastructure that can move with them is going to be really important. So that's a little bit on poultry pasture. You'll notice there's a lot of similarities between the pigs and the poultry. And I think there's an awful lot of similarities that allows those animals to easily be grazed in sequence. So now we're going to talk about poisonous plants. And the thing about poisonous plants is there's two things that I always say. First of all, um, if they do get into poisonous plants, this can be an issue because we're talking if it doesn't outright kill the animal, it's certainly going to cause weight loss, weakness, rapid pulse, unthriftiness. They're going to go off feed. You're going to lose productivity. They're not going to grow. You're going to miss deadlines. You're going to miss shipments. You're going to lose money, right? That's what's going to happen if they get into these poisonous plants. The other thing is that we can reduce the incidence of them eating these poisonous plants through having highly diverse pastures and keeping the animals on a high plane of nutrition, because these animals do have nutritional wisdom. They typically know what to eat and what not to eat, and if we give them everything they need in the pasture, a smorgasbord of a good diet out there, they're typically going to be selecting that diet. Um, that being said, some of the plants that are known to be poisonous to some of the animals that we're looking at are up on the screen. Things like pigweed, castor bean, nightshades. Nightshade is everywhere. Azaleas, poison hemlock, foxglove, and flax. Vetches, even hairy vetch is poisonous to poultry. Some of these things, uh, you know, uh, we have different ways to deal with them, right? Um, the first off, in order to reduce the incidence of poisonous plants in your pastures, is to just avoid heavy nitrogen fertilizing. That typically, if you've got a weedy situation, that typically makes the weeds come on even more. Avoid overgrazing pastures. That's a no-brainer. Whenever you overgraze pasture by keeping an animal on too long, basically what happens there is it reduces those plants' ability um, to thrive and to compete with the weeds that are there, and their root systems will decline, and the weedy plants will start to increase. And among those weedy plants could certainly be poisonous plants. You could also fence off areas and pastures where poisonous plants occur. You can control or manage plants to avoid poisoning problems. Um, you could rotate pastures to prevent overgrazing, as we said before. But another thing is to, like I said before, is to keep them on a high plane of nutrition. Supply adequate supplies of clean, fresh water at all time, and always consult your veterinarian to correctly identify a suspected poisoning from plants and to keep it from happening in the future. And so I think having an idea of some of those plants, talking to your extension, getting some guidebooks, knowing what's out there can really kind of help you to manage these things. Remember, these we're dealing with a very complex biological system that doesn't always want to play the way we want to play. So we need to learn how to play with it. And I think whenever we do that, that's the basics of regenerative agriculture. So having some groundwork on the breeds and the stocking rate and the pasture management for some of these, let's talk a little bit about feeding pigs and poultry on pasture. So here's the thing. We mentioned that pigs are not ruminants, neither are poultry, but pigs are not ruminants. They cannot get all of the nutrients they need from the pasture that they're on. I know that some folks have found themselves into train wrecks because they'll put them out on pasture and they'll just feed them garden waste and stuff like that and expect them to do their thing, and thinking that, well, pigs came from natural wild pigs that were in the wild. They've learned how to adapt. Well, the reality is that we're not going to get the type of production that we need to produce a market animal quality that somebody wants to purchase unless we feed them the energy requirements they need. And that's going to be in the form of a grain. And we're going to be feeding grains to our pigs while they're on pasture. That being said, a full grown sow can utilize up to 50% roughage in their diet. And so your sows who are on pasture, they're full grown, you can allow for 50% of their diet to come from that pasture alone. But growing and finishing pigs need a lot more protein. They need a lot more energy, and they need concentrated energy in a really dense diet. And so we're going to feed about 80% of their diet as a grain protein supplement. And they'll pick around the rest 20% from the pasture. And as they get bigger, the amount of forage that they can actually utilize is going to increase. Always provide free choice salt and mineral, and feed animals according to their stage of development. Typically, the literature shows that you should feed pigs about 2 pounds of a grain concentrate per day for sows and about 3 pounds for gilts and growing pigs. And lactating pigs would probably need around 2 to 3 pounds a day of a high protein ration for every 100 pounds of their body weight just during that lactation period in order to maintain that body condition and allow them to feed those suckling pigs. One of the things that you can use as well is a commercial concentrate pig feed that is appropriate for their stage of development for either sows, lactation, or growing and finishing. And as they're on pasture, feeding them at that 2 to 3 pounds per day will give them pretty much what they need. And then that allows them to go out and use their curiosity and their behavior to go out and pick and root and find tubers and seeds and plants and things that they want to top off their diet with. And that's going to give you that excellent lean pork that you're looking for in a pastured pig. And some people like to make their own rations, and there's a lot of good stuff out there. The U.S. Center for Pork Excellence is a great extension website that's got some pretty good information. And there's a Penn State Extension publication that talks about forage for feeding sows and gilts on legumes and silage and high quality pasture. And they've and I pulled that from that publication. Um, having having a ration of about 82% corn, 50% soybean meal, high protein soybean meal, and then a little bit of phosphate and salt and premix and trace minerals to top that off will give them the lysine and the energy, the dense energy they need in order to thrive on pasture. Those are available. Again, you guys are going to have this. You guys can download this PowerPoint if you want any of this stuff. It'll be available for you, so you can have some of these numbers. So that being said, we know how to formulate our feed. We know how to feed the pigs on pasture. So how basically do you reduce these concentrated feeds? We want to have them on pasture for a reason. We want them to utilize 50% of their diet for these pastured sows and 20% for the growing pigs. How do you utilize pasture as a feed resource and kind of reduce some of these concentrated feeds? Well, one of the principal ways that we're going to do that is by the sheer fact that offering a new diverse paddock that's got a lot of good growing green stuff in it really increases that searching behavior that animals have, and it increases the intake of forage and feedstuffs. We know this happens in pigs. We know this happens in cattle. um, Whenever animals are first turned into a new pasture, that first few hours to a day is going to be their highest intake of pasture. Another good reason to rotate pastures. Anytime the animals stay on a pasture longer than about a day or so, their intake of crude protein and energy is going to start decreasing because they're starting to pick through the least valuable sources of energy and protein that are on the pasture. So utilize that behavior to your advantage. More diverse pastures increase intake as well. Um, Use a high nutritional quality legume in the mix, and put grasses with them, because what the grasses are going to do is they're going to hold the soil together. They're going to serve to inhibit a lot of ground cover loss in well managed systems. So if you like to have a lot of legumes in your pasture, put in half and half grass, because those, especially those bunch grasses, something that's going to hold the soil together and really kind of mitigate some of the damage that can be caused by some of these guys. Um, you can kind of start to reduce the amount of grain and oilseeds that are fed this way by kind of allowing them to have that pasture, realizing that you can't kind of go below that 50% for sows, um, and allow them to eat to their nutritional needs. Make sure that you have a diet that is really well balanced in lysine. They cannot get lysine, the amino acid lysine, any other way than through that soybean protein source that they're getting. So that's going to be really important. That denser diet that they're going to get is going to produce more lean pork. It's going to allow them to get a really more desirable product and a higher dressing percent in a shorter period of time. These pigs are curious. They're curious animals, and they're going to get these roughages. They're going to seek them out. But remember that their digestion of these roughages is going to happen in the cecum. That comes after their small intestine, right? Um, that's why they can't really utilize that roughage in the way that ruminants can. Okay, let's talk a little bit about silvopasture, because we're coming up on question time here pretty soon. Um, the cool thing about silvopasture, there's been a lot of interest in it lately, is that pigs were originally forest dwellers. That's what they were whenever we brought them out of the forest and we started domesticating them. And they do really well in a forest environment, as do poultry. The thing is that we want to try to manage that silvopasture system such that we don't cause any destruction, right? We want to have ideally more bigger trees and fewer smaller ones that can be damaged more easily. So what we can do is we can look at that woodlot, that silvopasture area, as something that we can manage. We can cull certain trees and brush to try to maintain around a 70 to 75% tree crown cover. And what this will do is it'll allow grasses to come through and forbs and to have kind of that savanna system that we really want. We have something like this, we can start to utilize the woods as a part of our rotation, as long as we don't, overload it with nutrients. We can give those paddocks a rest of about a year, and they can eat those mass crops that come from the trees. They can dig for roots. They can eat the slash and the leaves from trimmed and down trees that you cut down in order to make that savanna system. But again, the key here is to observe, to manage for diversity, and to manage for productivity. So here is some pictures from John and Todd Hopkins' farm. They have a farm in northeastern Pennsylvania, very close to where I live. And these are some really good shots of kind of what a silvopasture system it looks like, and kind of what you should try to, shoot for. This one here with rooting activity, notice this is a highly diverse pasture with some brush, lots of forbs, some grasses, and you can start to see their rooting activity right now. And by the time you get to this situation right here, they've done a little bit of rooting, but notice there's an awful lot of cover left on that field. This field is going to recover very well from this, and then they can move over, and another day or two in another paddock they can root through, they can get tubers, they can eat grass, and you can manage the silvopasture system such that it doesn't cause an awful lot of destruction. Leaving them on too long can definitely cause destruction, because you can get tree girdling. They'll actually go after this, right? And this is something that you're going to have to observe and adapt to. Try to manage your pastures so they're so diverse that they don't go to the trees, and they're not in there long enough to become curious to actually want to go at those trees. So let's talk a little bit about gardens and crops. Um, we talked earlier that having crops, whether they're gardens or grains or whatever, in the rotation is a great way to take up nutrients. You can integrate these crops every year or so in the rotation to control weeds, to capture nutrients, and to reduce the contamination of your vegetable crop. Um, from zoonotic diseases that might occur from having the animals in there. So as you'll notice on the left side, pigs can be really good tillage guys. You can manage that tillage. If you want them to till, let them till. If that's part of what you want to do, let them do a little bit of pre-tillage for you. The picture on the right is a Himalayan blackberry. That is a noxious weed in the Pacific Northwest. And I knew a Seattle farmer who had a nasty plot of this Himalayan blackberry. She closed it off with pigs, probably about 6 pigs for a summer. And the pigs undergirded that, ate all of the little shoots, just completely decimated it. The following season, she put in a cover crop and then was um, planting crops into that spot that used to be Himalayan blackberry. So pigs can be a great way to take up nutrients and to actually prepare ground as well. I noticed some people are interested in like the disease aspect, and this is a concern, especially if you're going to be taking a plot that had pigs and poultry on it, and you're going to be putting a garden on it. This is why we really suggest that you have long crop rotations. You keep the animals on, um, and then don't crop it for about a year until you have a garden, or a garden crop, a food crop, a human food crop on it. That's because sometimes we can get this natural, flora from the animal's gut that can be reside in the soil that can actually cause disease in humans. Things like salmonella, E. coli, listeria, viruses like hepatitis, noroviruses, parasites like cryptosporidium. These things can happen, and so if we can maintain first of all a really good herd health program and your vaccinations, again providing high quality nutrition and fresh water, that low stress environment, the diverse quality forages, and sanitation, worker sanitation. Couple those with a good 1 year rotation, right? Don't allow them to don't allow them the crops to be on that ground that's been within a pig or a poultry pasture within a year, and you can usually reduce those problems with zoonotic diseases. So what we'll do is we'll just kind of end really quick on some characteristics that Tom Franson, a pork producer in Iowa, has come up with, and I kind of look at this as applicable to poultry as well. 8 steps to really having a profitable pastured pig and poultry operation is: number one, just choose your pastures well. Um, you know, ensure that they're well drained. Choose a pasture mix of diverse legumes, forbs, and grasses. Manage those as stocking rates. We covered those different stocking rates. Manage them appropriately and adapt. Don't leave those animals on any longer than they need to. Rotate the pastures and manage for regrowth, for cover, parasite load, and for nutrient distribution. Those pigs will make a moonscape of it, like I told you, and the poultry will mat the grasses down. So rotate. That's going to be really important. Provide a space for wallowing and shade. Provide enough water for animal demand. And don't forget this, a lot of people don't do this, is calculate your pasture and cost of production. Pasture's not free, and so consider it to be rent, right? Consider soil improvement, reseeding, and fencing. Calculate those all into your cost of production. And realize that as your pigs get bigger, they can utilize more roughage. This is a function, again, of the size of their stomachs and their need for energy. And always provide appropriate lysine and vitamin and mineral supplementation for pigs, because they can't get it on the pasture. And for profitable production, a pig or a chicken's energy needs, again, just cannot be met with pasture alone. Corn and soybeans is the best for providing those concentrated feeds. And that is the major part of the content. And I know I saw some questions coming in. I'll try to take some.
Yeah.
I tried to develop the presentation on a lot of the questions that you guys first put to us whenever you registered. But if there's any questions I can answer now, I'd be happy to do so.
Thank you, Lee. Yeah, maybe we can, if folks are okay, taking about 10 minutes for questions, that would put us over by a little bit. Do you have time, Lee? I want to make sure that
Oh,
we
yep, I'm good.
respectful of everyone's time. Okay, so we'll take about 10 minutes worth of questions. So just going back up a little bit, there's a question that came in about turkeys and hogs, and if there are any tweaks to this that you would recommend, I guess maybe with the stocking rate or density, but anything else that to take into consideration.
Yeah, well, I'm not a turkey producer, so basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go upon my historical background of animal behavior. And I think, if there's any other, poultry producers out there who raise turkeys, put the answer in the chat box and answer that question yourself. But I would think that you would just reduce the stocking rate, because they are a different animal. They do have a heavier footprint than a chicken. So I would just reduce the stock. What did we say? 50 to 100 hens per acre. You could reduce that, right? Whenever you're using turkeys. That's about as far as I can go into understanding turkey behavior, because honestly, I've raised lots of chickens, but I've never raised turkeys.
Someone's asking if there might be some other disease issues as well between turkeys and pigs, but yeah, maybe that's something we can kind of look into.
Yeah, yeah, and again, ATRA has some specifically some turkey disease publications that you can look at, coccidiosis and things like that from the ATRA website. So I would that was written by a really knowledgeable poultry specialist. So you could look that up on the ATRA website, and that'll be the best way to get your answer.
Okay. Let's see, going back up here. There was a comment that someone wanted me to remind folks that if you do join the National Young Farmer Coalition, that you do get an access to a discount code for the Premier One fencing. So FYI on that.
Perfect.
It's a good thing to know. Someone's asking, and maybe you went over this, does the pig netting work for poultry or only vice versa?
Yeah, well, the pig netting will definitely work for poultry. Premier has two types. They have the pig netting and they have hog netting, and the difference is going to be in its weight, right? So if you have never raised pigs before, you're just starting out, I would err on the side of caution, and I would go with the heavier uh, uh, pig netting. If you have been doing this a while and your pigs are really easily handled and you know your herd, um, and they respect the fence for one thing, then the poultry netting will work just as well as the hog netting will.
Okay, excellent. Let's see. There's a question. I think this is when we're talking about minerals and supplementation. Someone saying, I believe this is for the pigs, free choice salt alone or mixed with a mineral. What
Yep,
would you recommend?
and I would mix that with the mineral is what I would do. Salt and a mineral as free choice. They'll need to have if you did a premix, you could do a trace mineral, salt, and vitamin premix and put that out all together, and 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 then you would just supplement them with their grain and soybean ration on a daily basis.
Good. Okay, someone's saying or asking, aren't peas high in lysine as well?
Mm, yeah, boy, you got me there. I know that I know that soybeans are. Peas, boy, you got me there, and that's gonna have to be a lookup on me. You got me. That's a good one. That's
And
a
with
good one.
worms as well. Same
Mhm,
person is asking worms, or not
mhm.
even asking, maybe suggesting that as another source.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing. Um, you may be able to get an awful lot of their lysine requirement from the native vegetation that's there, or even through picking through worms and insects and things like that. But that's not. But I think I would not.
Rely on it.
I would not calculate that into my ration for supplying their lysine needs, because if they don't get the lysine they're going to need, they're not going to produce. And it's easy to give them soybeans, and they're going to have it anyway.
Okay, someone says, I have issues with nutrient management in my pig pasture. Phosphorus was already high when we started. It's only getting worse. In terms of rotating a crop in, do you have any recommendations for maximum nutrient removal for a crop
Yeah,
rotation?
I do. Annual ryegrass pulls up phosphorus really well. The problem is like, now what are you going to do with it,
Yeah.
right? Because if you just graze it or stomp it back in, you're putting it right back there. If you've got really high phosphorus, you're going to have to get that crop off somehow, right? So take it off as silage, take it off as hay, feed it somewhere else, right? Take it off as a hay and put it on a field that needs phosphorus supplementation as a mulch,
Hmm.
something like that. But a lot of the annual grasses will work really well at pulling up phosphorus.
Great. Okay. So we have maybe a series of questions here that are more like the logistics of kind of doing this with pigs. What do you do for wintering pigs? Do you use a dedicated winter paddock? When can they be reintroduced to pasture? And they're also wondering for best practices for maintaining water, fresh water throughout the day or
Yeah.
week.
Okay. So, and that water thing is going to depend upon your setup. Do you have a rotational system with a common water point that you can put on a concrete pad? Something like that would inhibit mudding and buildup of mud and cause stuff like issues like that. That would be one thing. Otherwise, it's going to be just like you would use in a sheep, cattle, or goat situation, and you can move your hog water, every time they move. A lot of people um, will use pipelines, black poly pipe. You can run it right along the top of the ground. You can bury it if you want it, and have spigots, and you can just move a small uh, waterer from paddock to paddock and hook it up with a jumper hose and a float valve, right? So that works really well for pigs, like it would for ruminants. Um, and what was the other question? The other question was
Winter, overwintering.
wintering.
Yeah.
Yep. So some people will winter in the woods. Some people will winter inside. Probably the best way to winter is if you can winter in a barn on a bedded manure system. And so Google it. It's a really great way to to capture nutrients. It will keep the pigs warm as they build up their manure, you put down more hay, more straw, and it will actually start to compost and it'll give off heat during the winter. And then later on in the spring, you can pull that out, you can compost that, and then you can spread it on your fields. So that's a great way to winter pigs for sure. You can put them in Quonset huts to do that. So that's my preferred way. If I had all the resources necessary, that's what I would do. Right, I would put them in bedded packs in the winter, and the chickens love that too because they'll go right in there with the pigs and they'll pick around and scratch in the bedded pack, and so it's good for both situations.
So just going back to that, we were talking about peas, field peas as a potential lysine source, and we had someone type in a link coming from Iowa State. Is it Iowa State?
Mhm.
Um, and there's basically an analysis, the nutrient analysis, showing that peas are a good source, 1.54% for lysine. Just so folks know, I guess that's out there.
That's good. And they will get some of it, but I just have to reiterate, you don't know how much they're getting, but you do know how much soybean meal they're getting. So you know that they're getting that
Right.
lysine.
Right. Okay, so maybe our last question is, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and acknowledging that we're not going to get to every question, but I will be providing Lee's email address for
Yes,
follow up.
yes.
But so someone's asking, how do pigs do in forested areas dominated by pine trees?
Yeah. Well, coming from the Northeast up here, we've got an awful lot of maples and oaks and such like that. Um, I would I would suppose they would do every bit as well. They're going to they'll do an awful lot of rooting. You will see less of a savanna system within a pine forest than you would a deciduous forest because of a lot of the needle matting. Unless you really get in there and open up the pine trees and get less than 70% canopy so that you can actually get some grass and forb growth. So I would say that they would manage it every bit as well, but you might have to open up the canopy just a little bit more because the pine needles tend to acidify the ground. And if anybody's been in a very dense pine forest, you know that can inhibit an awful lot of growth, especially underneath the trees.
And someone writes in that they do send their pigs through a 6-acre pine plantation. They love the dense shade and will eat some needles. So there's
Good,
so
good.
one last quick question, just because this one might be an easy one to answer. Can you recommend a type of water for the pigs that the pigs said kids pigs can't knock over or that creates a wallow?
Yeah, the only way you're going to keep it from wallowing is to either move it frequently or to put it on a concrete slab. Those are the two ways to keep it from becoming a wallow. Now, one of the ones that can kind of keep them from sloshing a lot of water would be the ball type floats. Right, where they have to push the ball with their nose to get at the water, and then it immediately closes whenever they pull their nose off. These are frost-free waters, is what they typically are, and they can be used during any time of the year. But I would be interested as to how one of those frost-free waters would work to prevent a lot of water spillage. But I think moving your water or having it on a solid surface is the only way to keep it from becoming a wallow.
Good advice. Um, Well, yeah, so we still have some questions and comments coming in. I really appreciate all the feedback. It's really been helpful to kind of have, different people kind of giving their experience and expertise as well. This is what it's all about.
That's what it's all about. You bet.
But in the interest of time, I have a few housekeeping items to share before we sign off. There is a short survey that's going to pop up on your screen. If you could fill it out, we would greatly appreciate it. Tell us, what you thought, how we could do things better. If you have other webinar topics for Lee or for other people that you'd like to see on, we're always gathering that. Like I said, a recording of this webinar and the slides will be available very soon. They're going to be archived on our website, and I'm also going to email them all to you pretty soon. A quick plug for some of other facts, other webinars that are coming up later this month. In fact, next week we have one about the Livestock Compass, which is an online tool that helps livestock producers measure profitability and identify ways to improve financial outcomes. I know Lee said that he was going to register to attend that session.
Hmm.
And then the week after, we're actually going to do a session with Steve Gabriel about silvopasture trees for livestock, food, and medicine. So I'll be sure to send out some links to our upcoming webinars and other information in my follow-up email. So on that note, I'm afraid that is all the time we have. It's always an honor and a pleasure to have you with us, Lee. It's um, really enjoyable to host this. Thanks for sharing your experience and your expertise, and for taking the time to answer the questions. Uh, you know, Taking that into consideration as you developed your presentation, and then during the
Well,
Q and A.
I thank you, Larissa. It's always fun to do these with you, and I appreciate the participants. There's a lot of knowledge out there, so I always love it whenever you guys like comment in and offer ideas and such, because that's how we really get to learn. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
This was great.
And I was just going to say, yeah, thank you all to everyone else in the audience, you sticking around for this, and your interest, your attention, and in your contributions. So I hope that we'll see you all on a future webinar, and have a great afternoon. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everybody.